Welcome to our podcast, The Reality of Student Workers, where we explore the challenges, resilience, and voices of student workers navigating jobs and education. My name is Jimmy Mancia, and I'm a research intern with the LSRP. But more importantly, I'm also a student worker myself.
I'm Ritika, and I'm also an intern with LSRP. Over the past several months, we've been diving deep into the experiences of student workers in Los Angeles through surveys, interviews, and data analysis. Today, we want to share what we've learned, the stories that we've uncovered, and why this research matters.
This project has been truly eye-opening for me. Even though I'm a student worker myself, seeing all this data laid out really enforced how widespread these issues are.
Yeah, same here. I think one of the most powerful parts of this research was hearing the personal stories behind the data.
And in the next episode, we'll bring in a student worker guest to hear their first-hand experiences. And in our third and final episode, we'll be going over recommendations with fellow student workers from the UCLA Labor Center. But for now, let's start from the beginning. Why did we decide to do this research in the first place?
I think one of the biggest motivators for this research was recognizing that a lot of working students are struggling, but their struggles often go unnoticed. There's this expectations that students just figure it out between balancing school, work, and financial responsibilities without much institutional support.
Exactly. And for many of us, working isn't a choice, it's a necessity. What's interesting is that while some assume student jobs are just for extra cash, our research shows that for a lot of students, work is about survival, covering rent, tuition, groceries, even supporting their families.
Right, and that connects to why we took a participatory research approach, because student workers are the experts in their own experiences. They don't just need to be studied from the outside. That's why we centered their voices, or our voices, throughout this project.
Exactly. We chose this approach because it emphasizes the importance of working with student workers rather than studying them from the outside. It recognizes that they bring valuable insights and experiences that should guide the research.
Absolutely. Instead of just analyzing numbers, we wanted to amplify student voices. So let's talk about what they told us.
We surveyed 139 students from different colleges in the LA County and conducted 26 interviews. We found that nearly half of student workers work between 16 to 30 hours per week on top of a full course load.
I know me personally, I work about 10 to 15 hours a week, but I'm also taking on 19 units, which is I'm taking 4 classes right now. And between my internship, my job, my 4 classes, the 2 clubs that I'm in and have leadership positions in, and also the lab that I'm in, if I were to take on more hours in my job, I wouldn't have any time left for academics. And that relates to another point that we learned in our study, which is that almost a third of the students take on more than 15 units per term, meaning they're essentially working full-time, as the last data point suggested, between school and their job. And that raises a really big issue, which is how does all of that impact their academics, especially when you consider how many are working in jobs that don't match their major.
I work around 20 hours per week, and this quarter I'm taking 16 units, but it really is a big juggle for me, having to work these 20 hours because these 20 hours are resources that I'm missing out on, which could be applied to, my coursework, finding future career internships and stuff like that. And one of the most telling findings was that only 1 in 4 students said their jobs were directly related to their future careers. That means most student workers are in positions that don't align with their long-term goals, but they have no choice because they need the income.
I work in a department that's completely unrelated to the career goals I have. I am pre-law, and I don't think I've ever had a job opportunity directly related to the kind of work I want to do in the future. We also found that while there are these career building resources students have access to, even though their jobs don't connect to their field of study. Nearly a quarter of students have never accessed these resources that universities claim are available. So some said that their work schedule made it impossible. Others mentioned a more structural barrier, like lack of support from campus services or feeling like gate kept out of certain jobs.
There's been so many times where I get an email from UCLA talking about a career building fair or a resume workshop. And then it's like, oh, but I'm scheduled for work that day and I can't really like call out because I need my job to support myself. That brings me to another critical point, flexibility. So many student workers told us that they rely on flexible hours to stay on top of their coursework and exams, but they often don't get it from their employers. In fact, only 18% said their schedules are always accommodated for school commitments, while 12% said they rarely or never got flexibility. That's a huge problem, especially during finals or midterms.
I know that I'm very, very fortunate in the sense that my employer puts academics first. But if I didn't have that, I would be so much more behind than I already am. I already have to ask professors for extensions for all of the things I have going on. And I already have to take shifts off for midterms or to do commitments for other clubs I'm in or internships, which leads to another point, actually, that 55% of students reported feeling anxiety about balancing work and school most or all of the time.
I myself suffer from anxiety, and a large part of it stems from financial burdens. My hours aren't really consistent all the time. And then it becomes this whole thing where it's like, oh, but I have to pay for my tuition, I have to pay for food, especially when, it's midterm or finals week and I'm still working those 20 hours, maybe even more. And this also, it's not just about emotional health, it's also about physical health. We also found that 70% of students said financial need forced them to work while sick, and only 45% actually took a sick day off. So student workers are sacrificing their well-being just to stay afloat.
So I went to work even though I was very, very sick, because even though this is a minimum wage job, every shift I have counts. And the expenses of living in a place like Los Angeles are so high. Just to pay my therapy bills, I have to work so many extra hours. And I've actually had to skip therapy because I couldn't pay the bill at some points. The amount that I made just wasn't enough to cover bills that high every week. At the end of the day, there's only so much work I can skip to take care of myself. My financial needs have taken a huge priority over my other needs, which brings us to another really big point about financial aid, which is that in our survey, 63% of participants said that they received some form of financial aid. But of those students, over a quarter reported that their aid had decreased since they started school, and 62% said that it doesn't fully cover their needs, forcing many to work long hours just to compensate for that gap.
The only reason why I'm able to even go to college in the first place is because of financial aid, FAFSA. But this doesn't necessarily mean that it covers everything. I definitely agree that financial aid has lowered in recent years, especially with rising costs. And it's so scary to think about, because if it weren't for these, government institutions, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be recording this podcast and sharing my story, which I think is super important. Not just my story, but the stories of other student workers. This financial strain, we've also found that it leads oftentimes to missed opportunities. One of the points that was really eye-catching for us was how 30% of students said extended deadlines would be the most helpful accommodation, but only 10% said all their professors provided accommodations. This means that schools aren't doing enough to support working students.
Yeah, accommodations from professors is one of the biggest obstacles that I've faced. Even just as we record this right now, I got a Canvas notification from one of my TAs about an attendance policy because yesterday I had to miss discussion because I had office hours for something else. And the attendance policy was that we can only miss one class unexcused. So I had my first absence early in the quarter when I had the flu that I was talking about before. But so that was my first absence, and the second one yesterday to go to office hours. So now I have to write a paper to make up for that attendance. But I already have a paper due tomorrow, and I already have another assignment due on Monday. And so now I have a third paper to write on top of that. And I think flexible policies like this are so crucial, and professors a lot of times are not as accommodating as they advertise themselves to be. I know there's this one class I took, I think last quarter, where my laptop broke the day that I had an essay due. So I emailed my professor on from my phone, and I was like, can I get an extension because my laptop broke and I need to get a new laptop because this is quite old. Like, it's already been repaired once. Like, I need to buy a new laptop. And well, first of all, that already took such a toll on my bank account, having to buy a new laptop completely unexpectedly. And second, my professor had responded with what about the device you emailed me from right now? Or what about that device in the background, which was my iPad in the background. And this was a 15-page paper. This is something so out of my control, the fact that my laptop had shattered. And that's wasn't something my professor was willing to accommodate. And they were quite frankly a little bit rude about. And there's just been so many instances where I've been really sick, or I've had something else and I needed an extension or some sort of flexible attendance, and my professor has not been willing to accommodate that, or I've had to do extra work to make up for that, which has put me even further behind in my other classes. And it's just this awful cycle of constantly catching up on work, and then just as you think you're close enough to finally be caught up, something else happens and you're behind all over again. So
yeah, no, I definitely agree with you 100%. I do really hate this professor culture sometimes. Professors can be hit or miss sometimes. Don't get me wrong, I've had the most, accommodating professors ever who stay on the syllabus. You get an automatic 24-hour grace period for every assignment. No need to ask, no need to email me. It's just free whenever you need it. But then I've had other professors who are the complete opposite. And this reminds me of an experience one time when I had a similar tech malfunction with my laptop. It wasn't really typing, the keys weren't really typing correctly. And I'm sure that as a poli-sci major, labor studies major, humanities major, all we really do is write.
Yep.
And typing was kind of everything I needed at that moment. And yeah, I admit I could have started it earlier, but it was just something I didn't expect at all. And, that's sometimes something we have to be prepared for. And I just wasn't prepared at that moment. And so when I emailed my professor, asking for an extension, the assignment wasn't due until midnight, but I know that I needed more time to give it my all. He replied to me kind of in a passive aggressive tone and told me, oh, you can, check out a laptop at the library, or visit the library, use one of the desktops. It felt so disheartening to hear that, because he was just kind of disregarding my emotions. I mean, I paid for that laptop myself, and to see it broken, that was another emotional layer that I had to go through, and it just felt like I was being totally overlooked.
Yeah, and you bring up a really good point about how you said, yeah, I could have started the assignment earlier when you asked for the extension, because when I have asked for extensions in the past, I've had professors be like, oh, but you've had enough time to work on this, or I gave you this assignment so long ago, but also all of my other professors gave me all of the assignments that long ago too, and I've had to do all of those other assignments as well. And it's not you give me that assignment 3 weeks ago and then absolutely nothing else goes on in the class. We still have assignments in between, and it's just so frustrating to hear that, oh, we gave you enough time, so what you're asking for isn't necessary. It's, oh, but I've had to write this paper for this class and this for that class, and I've had a midterm to study for. And even though you gave me 3 weeks to work on this paper for this class, you've also given me a midterm in between, and you've also given me other assignments that I had to do before that. So it's kind of been like a survival mode when it comes to doing my assignments. I think of what's due in the next few days, and then I work kind of one day at a time. And that's really the only way to get through the amount of work that we have to do. So yeah, really, when we step back and look at the big picture, there's a very, very clear pattern that students are overworked, financially strained, and lacking the institutional support that they need to succeed.
Yeah, and that's why we're creating a website to share these findings in a way that's accessible and engaging. We're using a multimedia approach, including data visualizations, student testimonies, and even a podcast like this one to make sure these stories reach more people.
And that leads to our next episode. We've shared the data, but next time we'll hear directly from student workers themselves.
Thank you. And that wraps up today's episode. If you found this discussion meaningful, please share with friends, classmates, or colleagues who might also benefit from these insights. And don't forget to check out our website where we'll be sharing more stories, research findings, and ways to get involved.
And don't forget to tune in next time, where we'll be speaking with a student worker about their firsthand experiences balancing work and school. See you then.
Thanks for listening.